Welcome back, and thank you for joining us, Shark's Perspective, the podcast with subject matter experts in marketing. When you look at marketing to millennials today, are you producing the same type of advertisements that you've normally produced for all generations, or is your brand evolving not just to speak to a certain age group, but instead to their behaviors and lifestyles? Somi Arian is the founder of Smart Cookie Media, the creator and producer of the documentary The Millennial Disruption, and she's a subject matter expert in the consumer behavior of millennials and in producing content. And on this episode, we'll discuss marketing millennials, producing that content, the proper messaging, and more. So let's tune in to a millennial expert with a shark for all generations on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Somi, thank you so much for joining us on A Shark's Perspective today. If you would, please tell us a little bit about your background and your career thus far.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me firstly. Um, about my background, I studied political science and political philosophy in St Andrews University in Scotland from 2005. And that was where I became really interested in the impact of one's worldview or philosophy of science on their behaviors. And during that time, I became very interested in complexity theory, which is a lot of what I do right now is based on my understanding of complexity theory that I gained back then. But after my education in St Andrews, well, I have two master's degrees from there. Well, one of them is from St Andrews, one of them is from Dundee, both in Scotland. And then I went into TV, worked in TV for 5 years. A lot of my work in TV was in reality. I did a reality show for a Middle Eastern channel based in London about the British culture for about 3.5 years, but my whole time and my whole experience in TV was about 5 years. But I made that show really popular, and it was like the third most popular show on the channel after the Persian Come Dine With Me and the Persian X Factor. During that time, I learned a lot about obviously creating reality style TV, and I found that that was one of the most popular and most powerful ways of communication with the younger generation. So during that time, I also worked with a lot of British businesses as I traveled all around Britain and did about 100 episodes of that show, which was called Why Not? And my presenter on that show, she was like, it's kind of like the Persian version of Kim Kardashian / Paris Hilton. So the idea was that her name was Neda. If you look her up on Instagram, she's got like nearly 2 million followers on Instagram now, and which is quite a lot considering that a lot of the Persian community can't even get on Instagram. So they would need to go through filters and everything. That's so that shows how powerful that style was, and yeah, how popular it became. So during that time, because I worked with a lot of British businesses, I learned that they really needed help with their marketing. I could see how open they were to having a camera in their in the business, and having somebody make a film about them. So I thought, okay, there's a real opportunity here, and there's a real gap in the market. So I'm going to go out and start my own company creating online content. I could also see that kind of TV was dying, traditional TV was not as popular with the younger generation. So I see that there was a movement of media from a traditional kind of satellite channels to online. So I started my own company in 2015. However, I realized that it wasn't as easy as I thought it would be, because although these companies were really interested in having content about them, they didn't really see themselves as being the content producer or being, the source of that content. They just wanted to be on TV, they just wanted to be on TV. So if you went to them and say, I'm going to make a reality show where you're going to be featured, whether it's in, say, Channel 4 or whether it's an American channel or a Middle Eastern channel, whatever it is, they'll be very interested and they want you to come in and feature them. But when you tell them that actually you need to become content producer, you need to become the media, then they are not as open to it because they don't understand it. It's just not the way that, yeah, they're used to, maybe a traditional type of advertising. So they'll be willing to spend money on advertising in a magazine or a TV channel or radio or things like that. But they wouldn't necessarily be open to actually becoming a media channel and behaving like a media channel and creating their own content. So that was very challenging. I realized that the market needed a lot of education. I also felt that I needed to put my money where my mouth was and create content for my own business and to show them how I can create and how I can use the content to generate leads for the business and get in new business. So I started creating content since the past 2 years. Part of the reason why I didn't start earlier is because I used to be in a heavy metal band before that, so before I started my own company. And for about 2 years after I left the band, I didn't do any kind of before. If you actually go on YouTube and like search my name, you will see a lot of my content which is related to the band previous to that. So I was kind of in a difficult place. I didn't know whether I wanted to be on camera again and talk about business all of a sudden after I was in a band and a lot of people knew me for that. It was like on the back cover of Metal Hammer and Kerrang magazine and things like that. So for 2 years I didn't do any kind of content. I didn't build my profile on social media. Just had 2 years complete break from social media. And then I realized that I couldn't go on like that, and if I needed to build a business, I needed to actually get on camera back and start building a profile again. So then I did a course called KPI, which is run by a guy called Danny Priestley. You might have heard of his book called Key Person of Influence. So I did that course, and Daniel was actually in my documentary, and that kind of helped me get back on track with getting on camera and creating content. It was very difficult at first. I was self-conscious about having an accent and things like that, which wasn't as much an issue for me when I was in a band, because that was part of my branding. It was like this Persian female, now she's like in the West and she's got a heavy metal band, so it was kind of cool and sexy. But when I was talking about business content, I at first I was quite self-conscious about it, but then I realized that actually if I concentrate on just getting the message across, what I've got to say is so much more important and so much more, in a way, interesting. And that if people are going to get distracted by my accent and not actually hear the actual content, right, it's their loss in a way, So I just thought I'm going to get on with it. So I went back to the studies that I had done when I was doing my MPhil, and I started thinking a lot more about the things that I had learned about complexity theory and how patterns of behavior emerge in a society. So I started first writing a book, but obviously being a filmmaker, making films comes to me a lot more naturally. So I started creating this documentary. It took me about 2 years. And I never thought I would put as much money into it as I did. But as time went by, I kept putting more and more money into it, and I kept doing more and more research, and it evolved into something that at first that was not exactly what I imagined, but it evolved into something a lot bigger. So that's kind of the story. So I made this documentary to...
Let me add the two masters, TV host, filmmaker, agency owner, Middle Easterner, marketing content producer, and heavy metal band artist. That is not a puzzle that I would have been able to put together had I known, not gone out on YouTube on my own and saw that first. Then let's talk a little bit about the video, which is really what pulled me in to want to speak with you. The documentary, The Millennial Disruption. Talk a little bit about the documentary itself and the types of amazing names that you've already mentioned. One, the amazing names that you've had on the show.
Yeah. So I remember I was on a short holiday with my boyfriend, sitting by the pool, working on my computer, and he was like you need to relax. And I was just, my mind was racing. I was thinking about what can I do? How can I make this film? At first, I wasn't even thinking of it being a film, like a single documentary. I was going to do like little pieces. Mainly, to begin with, was about luxury, because I was very much interested in luxury, because I grew up without it. I grew up during the Iran-Iraq war, and I come from a background of, we never had any money, my parents had never traveled anywhere. They were quite traditional, quite close-minded. So it was a struggle of growing up in Iran, and I wanted to just really see the world with a different perspective, and I felt like there was something out there that I didn't know. So in some ways, I became really interested in luxury. I guess, the first, this whole thing started with luxury.
Sure.
It started with my interest in luxury. So my first kind of experience or understanding of the word luxury was when I asked my mom if we could buy fresh apricots, and which I could smell. That was during the war. We didn't have any money, and my mom said it was a luxury. We couldn't buy it. She said, if you wait for a few weeks, then it won't be new season anymore. Then we can afford it. So at that time, this was like I was 6 years old. I thought, what is this thing? I need to have it, like luxury.
Right.
It's like changed something in my head at that moment. I was like, yeah, I want this luxury thing. So by the time I was 14, I could read and write English. I was reading only English novels. I taught myself English. Mainly, my interest in it started from heavy metal music, because the first time I heard, rock music, heavy metal music, I was like, I need to understand what this is about. This is so different from anything else I had ever heard before. And then from there, I went on to, by the time I was 17, I was working as tour guide for European tourists coming to Iran. And by the time I was like 18, 19, I had VIP tours. They were giving me tours from embassies. So I was hanging out with diplomats and European diplomats, and it just completely changed my worldview, and the things that I could see around me was just, the life was so different. And I was like, I'm interested in this. Like, there's something about the quality of these experiences that I want more of that. I want to understand it. So then I got offered a job in the Netherlands MC by the time I was 19, and that changed my life, and it allowed me to travel, because if you have an Iranian passport, you can't travel anywhere. But because I worked in the MC, all of a sudden I could travel. So that gave me a perspective on European luxury that was very fascinating. So when I started my own company, I kind of wanted to really explore that love of luxury in a way. And I guess luxury, there's a lot of questions about what is luxury. Luxury to me is always the next level of what you can afford now, So
Right.
it's completely relative. So if you are, it depends on where you are, what part of the world you are in, and your experience of luxury can be very different from one place to another. And
Well, here's the title for your next book: When Apricots Are a Luxury.
yeah. That somebody else, actually, Daniel Priestley once said that your next book should be called something like that. Apricot smell or something like that. I don't think that will be my next book. It might be one of my books in the
One
future,
of your books.
but but at the moment I have a good idea of where I want to go with my next book, which I can tell you later. But that interest in luxury, when I started my documentary, at first I wanted to make a sort of mini series, like 20-episode mini series about British luxury and going in and explore them. But when I started doing that, when I started, at first I wanted to do this mini kind of documentary, mini 2-3 episodes, 2-3 minute episode content about British luxury. But when I started working with these brands and I started talking to them, I realized that they were so, I don't know what the word, I guess audacious. They were like, they really felt that they didn't need any marketing. They didn't have any idea of where the world is going in a way. And they were like, we've been around for 100 years and we'll be around for another 100 years. And like there was the level of honestly confidence and audacity that I saw. It sort of disappointed me in a way, because I thought, no, you're not going to be around if you don't embrace the new culture with the way that things are changing. So I decided to broaden it, and I decided to go beyond just luxury, and I started to talk to other people. I was a big fan of Gary Vaynerchuk. So one day when I was telling you about sitting by the pool, that was when I just thought, I'm going to send a message to Gary. And this was after I had already been to one of his conferences. And in the conference, I got up and asked a question. I paid for a VIP ticket to make sure that I could sit closer, and I could make sure. And I argued with the organizers beforehand. I said, I want to get up and ask Gary a question. They were like, we can't guarantee it, whoever Gary chooses. I was like, no. I am getting up, asking Gary a question.
That's great.
So
they were probably scared he would drop an F-bomb.
But like, no, but I insisted, and they brought the microphone to me, so Gary was kind of forced to get me to give me an opportunity to stand up and ask a question. So that a few months later, I thought I was hoping that he would remember me, because afterwards I had sent him a message saying thank you for answering my question. So when I sent him a message on Instagram, and he didn't respond. I think he did respond at first, saying that I still have the correspondence. Quite funny how I got the whole thing with Gary through Instagram. So at first he responded saying, send me an email to Gary at vainmedia.com. And after that, I sent it and I didn't get a response. So I kept sending him these messages as I started making this documentary, and I said, look, I'm making this documentary, I really want you to be on it, and it just I've got to make this happen. So I didn't get any response after that initial one. Then I did an interview with the senior vice president of strategy and marketing of The Economist, and in that interview, he said, so who else do you have in this? And I said, I'm trying to get Gary Vaynerchuk. And he said, oh, yeah, I love Gary Vaynerchuk. He's great. And I took that bit where he said, I love Gary Vaynerchuk. And I sent that to Gary on Instagram. And I said that, look, I got the senior vice president of strategy and marketing of The Economist to say that he loves Gary Vaynerchuk. So you've got to be on the documentary. So in response to that message, Gary finally responded to that, and he put a smiley face in it. And then he sent another message to Tyler, who is his chief of staff, and said, make this happen. So from that, it took another, I think, 4 or 5 months before we actually made it happen. So then we went to New York, to their office. It was a very interesting, very eye-opening experience, and we got Gary on board. And I think that he is, he was the strongest voice in a way. I think, and of course Daniel Priestley, I think those two people really brought something unique. And then obviously I was very lucky also to have a few other really, really good names on there. So the gentleman from The Economist that I mentioned, Jamie, he brought really unique perspective from media point of view. And then I had the managing director of Marie Claire magazine. So it just sort of snowballed. And I had Bentley, Jaguar Land Rover. So Steinway, obviously they are our clients, so that was really really good to have one of our own clients on there as well. And I have done work with Bentley in the past as well. There's another project I've done with Bentley in the past. Had a few really good names from Savile Row, but I actually interviewed 40 people for this documentary, but I only used about 12 of them, because I wanted it to be really to the point. And a lot of the people that I interviewed from, like, for example, Savaro, and some of the people that are in the luxury kind of scene, just didn't really feel that it had the same kind of punch of, where we're going with modern marketing. So in the end, I had to make a brutal decision. Although I learned a lot from all of those people, I just had to make the brutal decision to really leave a lot of it out and just cut to the chase, which is what made it, I think, a very strong film.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I really enjoyed about it is at least the name millennial, and it's part of the title and part of the time and the capabilities that we have now quickly with film, is it's just a great insight on human behavior. It doesn't really matter. You could have done this on Generation X or Generation Z. You could have done it on any of them. I thought it was a really brilliant way of going back and looking at how companies should be targeting and speaking with millennials. Because to your point earlier, there are so many brands that have had conceit to the point where they don't even know how to talk to their customers. It's a shame they behave that way. To that point, how should we specifically speak to millennials?
Um, the first thing that has to happen in these companies is there needs to be a change of heart, and a change of culture within the company, because at the moment a lot of them, they're still thinking about communication in terms of advertising,
Mm-hmm.
and they're still thinking about talking about the product. The biggest change that has to happen, the biggest shift that has to happen, in my opinion, is, and this is something that came through all the research I've done. It's not necessarily anything that I picked up from any one person. It's a lot of it is from my experience of working in TV, because I know what it means to create a show as opposed to create an advertisement.
Right.
And the number one shift that has to happen is that these companies need to stop talking about their products. They need to instead start
agree more.
telling a story. Right? They need to start telling a story of their own brand, but also telling the story of the lifestyle of the customer. The kind of they need to create content that shows this is the lifestyle of our customers. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be Bentley or Jaguar, or it applies to everything and everybody. So, and when I create a documentary, that's my way of doing that. That's my way of storytelling, because I'm in a B2B environment. So I've created something that does that job of storytelling. There's nowhere in that documentary that is like an advertising for what I do. Actually, what was interesting was that when people came to our screening last week, someone asked me, so what do you hope to achieve with this documentary? I said, well, I actually run a marketing agency. And she was like, oh, so there was no place in that documentary that she didn't get a feeling that this was like an advertisement for what I do. It wasn't until, so with the documentary, I create intrigue, but then people go in and then they need to peel the layers to understand actually what it is that we do. And there's actually a whole other business that I'm launching soon, which is about millennials' workplace behavior, which I can't yet talk about openly until I'm waiting for a few things to be tied in terms of permission to be able to talk about it, because it's something that I've built with with an MD of a Fortune 500 company. So we're waiting for final okay from that company, whether we can use the name or not. But the point is that, I found a way to create content that's not about my product or service. That's, I don't have any direct, I don't even have a showreel. Like if you look at any production company, if you go on their website, the first thing you will see is a show reel. I don't even have a show reel. I don't think I need a show reel. It's just a completely different. So, for example, say if a company sells, let's say, for example, Karen Millen, right? It's a company that has workwear for women, for professional female. It's like slightly higher quality. It is still a high street brand, but it's slightly more expensive than, say, Zara and things like that. It's like a slightly like kind of higher end of the market, but it's not as expensive as, say, like super designer brands like Dior or whatever. Now, if that was my brand and I wanted to create content for it, I wouldn't create content just showing the dresses. I would create content for female professionals. Maybe it could be a documentary. There's so many ways to do
absolutely
interesting content. So the idea is to actually think like a TV company. Think like I'm commissioning a TV program, as opposed to I'm creating, advertisement. And again, like coming from that TV background, there's a huge difference between the two approaches. So what happens in advertising is that you're borrowing trust from that program, right? So, for example, when you're watching Game of Thrones, and then in the middle you see the advertisement for a cereal brand, that cereal brand is borrowing trust from Game of Thrones to gain people's trust, because people have been put in a certain kind of mindset, and they trust that channel, and they trust the TV show, and they trust the Mother of Dragons and Jon Snow, right? So then they associate that trust with the cereal brand. Now, on social media, there is not such an opportunity for brands to engineer trust the way that they used to in the past. So what they need to do is they need to figure out how to actually become the commissioner, the programmer. That's the difference.
Yeah. So, and I couldn't agree with you more. You brought it up earlier about how content is hard for people to produce, and I still to this day don't understand that. And I think that's why they're having so many problems speaking to, in particular, millennials, but really all people that in struggle, and how a lot of brands are struggling. But I hope that we never get to the point where the Khaleesi never picks up a can of Dr. Pepper, while she's being the mother to her dragons. But you never know; it may come up in an advertisement. So, who are the brands that you're seeing do marketing to millennials very well?
Amazon, Apple,
Yeah.
which I talked about in the documentary.
Yeah.
There are not many. Most of them are not doing it.
Agreed.
And then there are influencers that some of them are doing well. Some of the influencers, when I see in my Instagram feed, some of the influencers, every single thing that they post is an advertisement, and it's just so off-putting. I think that's not going to go far. But there are some influencers that are creating some really interesting content, like Gary Vaynerchuk. That's why he talks about jab, 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 right hook. So most of what he does is a jab. Every now and then he throws up a right hook, which is why I personally appreciate his content so much. That's why when he brought out his book, I bought 20 copies of it.
Did you really?
Just to support him. Yeah. So there are not many, to be honest, with big brands. There are not many that are doing proper content, the kind of content that I'm talking about. There are not many.
Right.
I'd say Amazon and Apple are some of the best. There are other companies there are companies that are sort of trying to catch up or catching up. I know Virgin is trying. They're doing some interesting stuff.
Microsoft's doing some interesting stuff.
Yeah, they're doing some interesting stuff. But yeah, I think a lot of companies are waking up to it. But by far, I'd say Amazon is number one. Apple is number two, in my opinion.
Agreed. And, so much of, I think, what people look at especially is technology, and, having an app is what they look at, or maybe a social media presence, but really it's about the content you produce on those channels, not just whether or not you have access to the channel. But what are some of the similarities that you're really seeing that, that works broadly appeal for brands when they're talking to multiple generations? I mean, you've got some of your car buyers. I mean, a lot of millennials now have much better purchasing power and can buy, some can buy Land Rovers and Jaguars, but where are you seeing brands do well when they're speaking to the full blend of generations?
To be honest with you, as I said in the documentary, being a millennial is not about one's age. It's about how people's behavior is impacted by technology. When I think about my business, actually, most of my audience are not necessarily millennials. Majority of my audience are people that are in their 40s and 50s, who are the marketing directors of large companies. But what's interesting is that when we do these business breakfast meetings where some of the people that are connected with me on LinkedIn, we invite them, and they come to learn and gain perspective about the things that I've been researching on and our work in general. Some of the people that have been coming to these business breakfast meetings are, for example, the chief marketing officer of BBC came to one of these, or like the lady from Marie Claire that I mentioned, the managing director. Like these are not millennials. So when I look at the people that come to our breakfast meetings, these are people that have engaged with me through my content on LinkedIn. So that goes to show that it's across the board. I said it in one of my pieces of content on LinkedIn that I use the word millennial just to draw you in, but actually this is a lot bigger than millennials. And across the board, the behavior of majority of people, both in B2B and B2C, is changing, and increasingly the way to gain their trust and engage with them is through content. Now, I have found a way to do that on LinkedIn that has worked really well for me, and increasingly I'm also looking to Instagram. Instagram is not my main channel, but there are some aspects of it that interest me. For example, if I want to bring out a book and things like that. But for example, at the end of this week, I've been invited to do an interview on BBC Radio 5 Live, and that came through my Instagram. So that was interesting, learning that they found me through Instagram, not LinkedIn. So it goes to show that some of those channels, it's so non-linear. You've got to think across the board. Your audience could be anywhere from LinkedIn to Instagram to Twitter to Facebook. But at the end of the day, you can only do what your budget allows, and you have to prioritize. So in my case, I prioritize LinkedIn number one, and then Instagram two. I do really want to focus more on YouTube, but it's just a matter of budget. But I think you've got to find out who your audience is, where their attention is, and then create content that would engage with them on that platform without being about the product, without being promotional.
Couldn't agree more.
I don't have any promotional content in that sense. The only promotional content I have is if I show the trailer of, for example, my film, and say, go and watch the film. But then again, I'm not even charging for the film.
Exactly. Yeah, you're collecting a download
there
link.
Will be a time. Yeah, there will be a time where, I will throw a right hook, but I will have provided so much value that when the right hook comes, people don't even think of it as right.
You can wait until we get to the Generation Z documentary, and then you can charge. Well, you've got
well,
you've got a great global perspective. I mean, Middle Eastern to to European to North America. Are you seeing any major differences from continent to continent or country to country across
To be honest
consumer
with you,
behavior?
actually, to be honest with you, not really. What's interesting is that, so I'm not very close with my family back home, but my brother has been contacting me recently on Instagram, and I never even checked his Instagram page. And then a few days ago, he sent me a video. I said, like, check out my video. And I went to his Instagram page for the first time, and he's like 11 years younger than me. Went to his Instagram page for the first time, and I saw that he's got 13,000
Oh
followers,
my
and
gosh!
everything that he posts, like there are like 400 comments on it. I was like, how did this happen?
Yeah.
When did this happen? And he's got, he's like, he does bodybuilding and things like that. But it just goes to show that like the behavior is so similar. It doesn't matter where you are. Internet has made it possible for people to go beyond borders, and the only thing maybe that is stopping certain countries to work together is the political atmosphere and the political
Right.
situation. But other than that, the behavior of people across the board is so similar, and that's what fascinates me. And what I'm really interested in is the impact of technology on human behavior, not on Western human behavior. It's so similar.
Exactly. Well, be careful because your younger brother with 13,000 followers as a micro influencer may monetize it and try to charge you for when you want to repost something. So he may
Yeah.
he may just go that way. So Somi, thank you. I want to ask you: are you ready for the 5 most important questions of the day?
Sure.
All right, here we go. Facebook or Twitter?
Neither.
There you go. So you're in England now, so this is obviously a big choice. Coffee or hot
Yeah.
tea?
Tea.
Gen X or Gen
Green.
Z?
So you said Gen X or Gen Z?
Yes.
Gen Z is the future.
Buckingham Palace or Big Ben?
I don't know. I'm not crazy about the royalty stuff. Big Ben, I guess.
And the most important question you're going to be asked today: biscuits or cornbread?
Oh, I'm gluten free.
You're gluten free. There you go.
Sorry.
That's okay. Well, Somi, thank you so much. Where can people find out more about you, Smart Cookie Media, your social followings? Where can people follow along to get more advice about marketing, not just to millennials, but to all people? As you said before, it's not just about age.
Sure. So there is obviously Smart Cookie Media, everything to do with marketing. Then there is my new thing coming up, which I can't yet say. But if people follow me on LinkedIn and Instagram, I will post about that new project in the coming days. So yeah, those things, and then I will be working on another documentary and book and all that stuff. So it's all on the horizon.
Absolutely. Well, I will post the documentary link as well on my own show notes. And Somi, thank you again so much for joining us on A Shark's Perspective today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
So there was my conversation with Somi Arian, the founder of Smart Cookie Media, the creator and producer of the documentary The Millennial Disruption, and she's a subject matter expert in the consumer behavior of millennials and of producing content. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with her. First, I love her quote: "If I concentrate on just getting the message across, what I've got to say is so much more important and so much more, in a way, interesting." I agree, and my advice is for brands to dive in and engage the new culture with content that interests them. That culture isn't age specific, it's just the way people want to interact with brands today. So go out there and don't be afraid to produce some great content. Second, that content is extremely difficult for a lot of companies to produce. It's quite often that they're just more comfortable handing over money to an agency to produce a traditional ad. But creating and writing content and stories is difficult because they don't understand it. The companies who are doing a good job are learning to understand that they are their own media channel per se. Look, the biggest shift that has to happen is companies need to stop talking about their products and start telling a story of the lifestyle of the customer and how the product or service fits into that lifestyle. And try to think like a TV company rather than creating an advertisement. And when you think of channels, you got to think across the board. Your audience can be anywhere. As she said, you've got to find out who your audience is, where their intention is, and then create content that would engage with them on that platform without being about the product or without being promotional. Third, as she said, being a millennial is not about one's age. It's about how people's behavior is impacted by technology. Great point. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our conversation regarding another one of the many components that makes up marketing today. So whatever your age is, be Generation Smart, be Generation Nice, and quite simply be young at heart. And join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.